The smell of blood still lingered in the air long after the last sword fell silent. The trident had run red, not with victory, but with rebellion crushed. Robert Baratheon lay dead, his hammer buried beside him, shattered and soaked in his own blood. His army, once fierce and defiant, had been broken like twigs under dragonfire. Rhaegar Targaryen lived, and he stood tall on the battlefield, victorious, his silver hair stained with ash, his violet eyes cold as winter. They called it the Last Rebellion, because after that day, no one dared raise banners against House Targaryen. Again, Eddard Stark had been captured, not killed. He knelt in chains before King Aerys himself, dragged back to King's Landing with torn armor and a hardened jaw. The Mad King wanted his head, wanted to burn him alive, but Rhaegar intervened. "Spare him," he said. "Let the realm see mercy." But it wasn't mercy. It was strategy. Rhaegar saw the future not in fire, but in order. He knew that blood and flame had nearly lost them the realm, and he wouldn't let his father ruin what little trust they still had among the lords. Lyanna Stark, hidden away in the Tower of Joy, gave birth alone. She died anyway. Rhaegar was too late. But her son, Jon, lived. Rhaegar never told the truth. Instead, he gave the boy to a loyal knight of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald Hightower, and ordered him raised in secret. He must live, but not as a prince. Let him be no one until the day he is needed. That day never came, but the lie endured. Jon Snow grew up in the Reach under another name, with no clue of the dragon blood in his veins. Back in Winterfell, Rickard Stark's body was returned in a blackened box. Brandon too. The North boiled with rage, but they were leaderless, lordless, and terrified. With Ned imprisoned and Benjen still a boy, House Stark bent the knee. Catelyn Tully, still promised to Ned, was told to marry someone else, Sir Lyn. Corbray, a man thrice her age and twice as cruel. She obeyed, her heart turned to stone. In the Vale, Jon Arryn paid for his defiance with a quiet assassination, poison in his morning wine. Lisa, his young bride, was taken into custody and later wed to Viserys Targaryen, the petulant younger brother of Rhaegar. She hated him, but the marriage sealed the Vale's loyalty in blood. The Lannisters were the ones who played it smartest. Tywin Lannister, who had waited on the sidelines, marched on King's Landing with banners raised just as Robert fell. But, instead of joining the rebels, he offered his sword to the crown. Aerys, desperate and paranoid, let him in. But Rhaegar saw through the ploy. He took the throne weeks later, claiming his father was unfit to rule. Aerys was quietly smothered in his chambers by Ser Jaime Lannister, an act whispered about but never punished. Rhaegar didn't want justice, he wanted peace. The Red Keep was no longer a place of madness. Under Rhaegar's rule, it became a court of poets, scholars, and peace, on the surface at least. But in the shadows, people remembered. They whispered about the burning of Rickard Stark, the screams of Elia Martell, the secret of Lyanna's child. The rebellion may have failed, but the seeds of resistance were still buried in cold northern soil. In the years that followed, the Iron Throne seemed steady. Rhaegar took the crown and married again, not for love, but politics. He needed allies. He chose Margaery Tyrell, barely 15, from the Reach, a beauty with a serpent's smile and a grandmother sharper than any blade. Together they produced heirs, children of fire and flowers raised with silk and steel, but peace bought with blood never lasts long. In the north, Jon Snow, raised under the name Joran Flowers, began to ask questions. His dreams were strange, filled with dragons and snow, and a woman's voice calling him Aegon. He didn't know it yet, but the fire in his blood was waking. And far to the east, beyond the narrow sea, a young girl with silver hair and purple eyes watched the skies and dreamed of a throne stolen from her. Her name was Daenerys Targaryen, and fate was only beginning to move. Winterfell had become a cold shell of what it once was. The great hall echoed with silence, its fires burned lower, and the bannermen's feasts had turned to quiet suppers. Without Eddard Stark, the North had lost more than a lord. They had lost their spine. Benjen Stark, still too young to command, served as a figurehead while Maester Luwin and a council of wary bannermen tried to keep the realm in order. But fear made them weak, and their loyalty was forced, not earned. The North remembered, though. They remembered the screams of Lord Rickard in the flames, the wild rush of Brandon's strangled death, and how the Dragon King had demanded it all. And they remembered Robert, fierce and laughing, the man who had promised vengeance and instead found death at the Trident. There were no songs for him, only silence. But rebellions don't end with the death of a king's enemy. They just go, quiet for a while. Far to the south, in King's Landing, Rhaegar ruled as if he bore no guilt. He wore no crown of conquest, only a circlet of forged silver, modest and plain, as if humility could erase the madness that had come before him. His court called him the peace-born king. The poets praised his gentle rule. But in dark corners, they whispered another name, the usurper who wore a dragon's mask. Elia Martell, his first wife, bore it all in silence. She lived in the Red Keep, a queen in name but not in heart. Her children, Rhaenys and Aegon, were alive and safe, but barely acknowledged. Rhaegar never touched her again after Lyanna Stark. She knew it. Everyone knew it. But she endured because that's what Dawn did. They waited. And when they struck, it was always with poison, quiet and patient. The real queen, though she wore no crown, was Margaery Tyrell. Rhaegar's second marriage was one of politics, but the Reach had flourished under the arrangement. Old Lady Olenna made sure of that. The Tyrells had gone from stewards to power brokers. They whispered in Rhaegar's ear. They controlled trade, coin, and favor. And Margaery, sweet, clever, dangerous Margaery, watched her husband with wide eyes and a quiet smile, all while keeping her own secrets. In this false calm, the realm pretended all was well, but in the east, a storm was growing. Daenerys Targaryen was no longer a child. Viserys, her brother, was still cruel, still obsessed with taking back the throne he believed stolen. But the truth was, Rhaegar never intended to share power. He gave Viserys a bride, a tower, and 1,000 guards, and then cut him off. "You are my brother, but you are no king," Rhaegar had said, and that had burned more than dragonfire. Viserys raised Daenerys in bitterness and exile. They were given lands in Myr, far from Westerosi affairs, but Viserys kept feeding her the tales, how the throne had been stolen, how Robert's war had shattered their family, how Rhaegar had forgotten them. He never told her the truth, that Rhaegar was the king, that he had abandoned them because they were no longer useful. So Dany grew up believing she was the last hope of House Targaryen. Her anger was quiet, deep and cold, and far off in the Reach a young man named Joran Flowers, known to a few as Jon Snow, trained in the art of sword and leadership under Sir Gerald Hightower. He was told he was a bastard of a noble knight, and a maid long dead. But the blood in him ran hot, restless, confused. His dreams were wild, full of fire and snow, of a tower with roses and screams, of a dragon with 3 heads. One day, he found a letter hidden in Sir Gerald's chest, one he was never meant to see. It bore the sigil of House Targaryen. Inside a name, Aegon, not Jon, not Flowers. Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna. His whole world shattered. He fled, disappeared into the night with nothing but a blade and a storm in his heart. Back in King's Landing, Rhaegar felt that Wineshift, his son, his real son, was waking, and he knew then what he had always feared, that the lie he buried would one day rise and swallow them all, because a kingdom built on silence never stays quiet for long. The north was colder than it had ever been, not just in weather but in spirit. Whispers of rebellion still lived in its shadows, but no one dared speak too loudly. Every raven was watched, every bannerman carefully chosen. The Dragon Kings. Reach was long, even past the neck, and yet heart still burned with quiet defiance. You can freeze a wolf, but you can't kill its instinct. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, rode alone across the King's Road. The name felt like a ghost crawling beneath his skin. He didn't know what to do with it. He had trained all his life to be honorable, to serve, to obey. But how do you obey a father who abandoned you? How do you kneel to a king who never claimed you? And worst of all, how do you face a world that would kill you if they knew who you were? He headed north to Winterfell, not to claim anything but to see it, to understand the place where his mother had died and where his blood had once belonged. He didn't expect welcome. What he found instead was silence. The Stark sigil still flew, but there was no pride in it, just duty and fear. Benjen Stark was the first to meet him. Now a man grown, cloaked in the black of the Night's Watch, but his eyes held a storm of recognition when he saw Jon's face. "You look like her," Benjen said, voice low. "You have Lyanna's eyes." Jon said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Benjen took him in, but not to the halls of Winterfell. He brought him to a crypt beneath the castle, to the statue of Lyanna Stark. Jon stood there, for hours, staring at the cold stone face of the mother he never knew. Benjen watched from the shadows, silent. "She died to protect you," Benjen finally said, "and they buried her story with her." Jon's fists clenched. Why? Why didn't Rhaegar tell the truth? Why did he let the world believe? Because he's a dragon, Benjen said bitterly, and dragons protect their fire, even if they burn everything else. Jon wanted to scream, to curse Rhaegar, to run until his feet bled, but he stayed. He needed answers. And Benjen, guilt-ridden and quiet all these years, began to share pieces of the truth. Lyanna had loved Rhaegar, yes, but love couldn't survive in the shadows, not when it brought death and fire to the whole realm. Jon wasn't the son of a mad kidnapping. He was the child of a secret love and a sacrifice. But the North didn't care about the difference. If they knew the truth, they'd rebel again, and the realm would bleed once more. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, Rhaegar sat on the Iron Throne, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The peace he had built was beginning to show its cracks. The Riverlands were restless. Lord Hoster Tully had died, and his bannermen whispered of vengeance. The Stormlands were quiet, but not loyal, and Dorne, always silent, had started turning away envoys. But the worst news came from the east. Viserys had vanished, his guards slaughtered, his keep empty, and Daenerys Targaryen was gone with him. Rhaegar knew his mistake. He had tried to bury his siblings, to keep them quiet, safe, and small. But fire doesn't stay caged, not dragon fire. Viserys may have been weak, but his hate was strong, and Daenerys, she was something else entirely. He called his council, Lord Varys, older but still whispering in shadows, Sir Barristan Selmy, now Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, and Grandmaster Marwyn, brought in to replace Pycelle with someone more curious about prophecy. Rhaegar spoke only 5 words. Find them. Kill the threat. But it was already too late. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen stood before Caepyre in the Dothraki Sea, her brother dead, burned by his own greed, and her eyes full of something ancient. As the flames rose, so did the dragons, 3 of them, black, green, and gold, and the stars above trembled at their return. The dragons screamed into the sky, and the world trembled. Daenerys Targaryen stood at the heart of the flames, bare as birth, her skin untouched by fire. Around her, the Dothraki fell to their knees, not in fear but awe. She was not just a Khaleesi now. She was something more, something ancient, something reborn. They called her Misa, Mother. But in her heart, Daenerys knew she was something far deadlier. She was vengeance. For years she had believed her brother's lies, that the throne was taken, that the world had betrayed them, that Rhaegar had failed them all. But now she understood. Viserys had never wanted peace. He wanted power, and Rhaegar, he had simply left them behind, like ashes after a fire. She would not be forgotten. She would not be left. She had dragons now, and Westeros would burn. Meanwhile, back in Westeros, the storm was building. Jon Aegon, though he still couldn't bring himself to say it, lingered in the north. Benjen had begged him to stay hidden, to let the past die. "There's no place in this world for who you are," he'd said. "The Starks can't protect you. The Targaryens won't welcome you. If Rhaegar knows you live, you'll become a weapon or a target." But Jon couldn't run anymore. The truth had changed him. In his blood was dragonfire, in his soul wolf's honor. He was both, and he had to decide who he would become. One night he rode to the wall. He looked out over the icy wilderness, felt the cold clawing at his skin, and realized the truth. The real war wasn't over thrones. It was coming from the north. Something stirred beyond the wall. The wildlings had fled their villages. Strange tales drifted south of dead men walking and cold winds whispering through dead trees. No one in the realm cared. No one listened. They were too busy playing games of power. In King's Landing, Rhaegar received word of the dragons. Not rumors, confirmation. The flames had returned to the world. His face, normally calm, broke for just a moment. A flicker of fear, a reminder that prophecy could not be denied. He turned to Marwyn, the Grand Maester, who nodded slowly. The comet in the sky, the waking of the stone eggs, the return of the last blood of old Valyria. The signs are here, Your Grace. The dragon must have 3 heads. Rhaegar's hand clenched the arm of his throne. He had one heir, his young son, by Margaery Tyrell, a delicate boy named Baelor. Hand 2 from Elia, who he barely acknowledged, but they were too young, too unprepared. And Daenerys, she was wild, untamed, dangerous. Then there was Jon, the son he had tried to forget, the one with the blood of ice and fire. Rhaegar ordered. The council cleared. He summoned Ser Barristan alone. The old knight, still loyal, knelt before him. "I have a mission for you," Rhaegar said quietly. "Find my son. Find Aegon. He may be the only one who can stop what's coming." "But will he serve you, Your Grace?" Barristan asked. Rhaegar didn't answer. He stared out the high window of the Red Keep, watching a red star streak across the sky. "I don't know," he whispered. "But he must choose, or everything we've built will burn." Far away in Dragonstone, Daenerys stood atop the ancient castle that had once been the Targaryen cradle. Her dragons circled the towers, their cries echoing like thunder. She placed her hand on the stone, felt the warmth of her ancestors beneath it. "This is where it begins," she said. Her new advisor, a red priestess named Melisandre, stepped beside her. "You are the flame reborn, my queen. The prince that was promised may not be a prince at all." Daenerys smiled coldly. "No more waiting, no more promises. We take the throne, we take the world." In the north, Jon Snow looked out across the wall and felt a cold deeper than anything he'd known before. In the south, Rhaegar stood alone in the throne room, knowing the fire he had tried to bury was coming to consume them all. And the game of Thrones, long paused, began again, with dragons on every side. Snow fell thick on Castle Black as Jon, no longer just Jon Snow, stood atop the wall. The bitter wind bit at his face, but it didn't bother him anymore. His thoughts were elsewhere. Below, the brothers of the Night's Watch were training, their numbers thinner than ever. Too many had deserted. Too many had died in silence beyond the trees. But Jon had seen enough to know the stories were true. The dead were walking, and no one in the south gave a damn. Maester Aemon, old and nearly blind, had taken a liking to Jon the moment he'd arrived. Maybe he saw something in him, something familiar. When Jon confessed the truth, when he said, "I'm not a bastard, I'm the son of Rhaegar Targaryen," the old man didn't flinch. He simply nodded, eyes glistening with memory. "I knew your father," Aemon said quietly. "He was a dreamer like many of us, but dreams are a dangerous thing in a world full of knives." Jon clenched his jaw. "He left me to rot in a lie." "And perhaps he thought that lie would keep you alive," Aemon answered. "It nearly did." Still, Jon couldn't stop thinking about what it all meant. If Daenerys had truly returned with dragons, if Rhaegar still sat on the Iron Throne and the Night King was rising in the north, then the world was heading for war on all sides. He couldn't fight for one without facing the others. Ser Barristan found him 2 days later. He arrived on a black horse under a flag of peace, white hair blowing in the wind, his armor still polished despite the cold. Jon met him at the gates, sword at his side. "You're here to take me back," Jon said without emotion. "I'm here to ask you to come back," Barristan replied. "Your father needs you." Jon laughed bitterly. "Now he remembers me." "He remembers what the world is becoming," Barristan said. "He believes you may be the only one who can stop it." Jon looked out over the wall. "There are worse things than dragons in the world, sir. If he knew what's coming, he wouldn't be thinking about thrones." Barristan was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke softly. "There's a war coming, Jon. But it's not just swords and fire. It's the soul of the realm. If your aunt burns her way to the throne, if the north rises again, if the dead pour through the wall, this kingdom won't survive." Jon looked into the old knight's eyes and saw only truth. "Painful, heavy truth. I'll go," he said, "but not for Rhaegar." In King's Landing, the news of Jon's survival hit Rhaegar like a ghost rising from a grave. He ordered the royal chambers sealed and did not emerge for 3 days. When he finally did, his face was drawn, his crown absent, and his steps slow. He summoned his children, Baelor, his son, with Margaery, and Rhaenys and Aegon by Elia Martell. He looked at them one by one and saw the past and future burning together. "My blood may rule this realm," he said, "but only one of you can save it." He said no more. He didn't name Jon. He didn't name an heir. He left the room, and the storm behind him brewed in silence. Daenerys, meanwhile, had reached the shores of Westeros. Dragonstone welcomed her as its true queen. Her banner flew high, the three-headed dragon of old Valyria, flames twisting in the wind. Her armies were growing. Unsullied Dothraki, sellswords from Volantis and Korth, and exiled Westerosi who saw in her the fire that would cleanse the realm. She didn't want to talk. She wanted to strike, but Melisandre counseled patience. "You are the flame, yes, but another flame burns to the north, one with ice in his blood, one who may be your enemy, or your salvation." Jon and Daenerys met in the ruins of Harrenhal. No court, no banners, just a cracked hall of melted stone and broken dreams. She rode in on a black dragon. He rode in on a white horse. She was flame, he was snow, and for a long moment they simply stared. Then she spoke. "You're the son of the man who abandoned me." Jon nodded. "And you're the daughter of the man who tried to burn the world." Silence again. Then she stepped forward. "So what do we do, Jon Snow?" He looked around at the ash-stained walls, then back at her. "We stop pretending this kingdom is worth saving the way it is. We fight the war that matters, and then we decide what's left. They say Harrenhal was cursed, built by pride and broken by dragons, but for the first time in generations, it held something close to hope." Jon and Daenerys sat across from each other at a cracked stone table, the wind howling through the broken towers. Their talks were tense at first, every word measured, heavy with grief and suspicion, but slowly the fire in her heart and the frost in his soul found balance in one simple truth. Neither of them trusted Rhaegar. Daenerys spoke of the years in Chi-O exile, of watching her brother wither in his madness while her father's name was spat like poison across Essos. She confessed that the Iron Throne meant little to her now, only that she would never be forgotten again. Jon didn't want a crown. He never had, but he could no longer ignore who he was. He saw the realm breaking apart at the seams. Rhaegar's lies, the North's quiet rage, and the dead marching from the cold. Someone had to stop it. Someone had to unite what remained, but that someone didn't have to be king. "I don't want to rule," Jon said simply, "but I'll fight, if it means keeping the living alive." Daenerys looked at him long, a flicker of something unreadable in her violet eyes. "Then we fight together." They left Harrenhal with a pact, not a marriage, not yet, but a unity of purpose, one fire, one snow, one war. But peace was still far away. In the Red Keep, the news of their meeting reached Rhaegar, and the last of his composure began to unravel. His court noticed his hands shaking. His council heard the tremor in his voice. Even Margaery began to speak to her grandmother in hushed tones about succession. He summoned Elia Martell to his side for the first time in years. "I made a mistake," he said. Elia, proud and weary, stood tall. "You made many." He didn't argue. Then he summoned his eldest son, Aegon. The boy had grown strong and thoughtful, raised in Dorne, far from courtly games. "You may be the one to fix what I broke," Rhaegar told him, but it was too late for legacy, because from the north came the storm no throne could stop. The wall had fallen. Jon's warning had been right. The Night King, silent and relentless, had breached the ancient magic. The dead poured through, armies of whites and white walkers, sweeping the gift, tearing through the north like a plague. Winterfell sent desperate ravens. The Vale shut its gates. The Riverlands scattered, but Jon was ready. He and Daenerys united what forces they could. Dothraki beside northern bannermen, unsullied alongside wildlings, Tyrion Lannister, long exiled and bitter, returned as Daenerys's hand, sharp of tongue and wary of dragons. Sansa Stark, hardened by years of pain, took command in the north with icy grace. Arya returned from Braavos with a blade that whispered Valyrian death, and the dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, darkened the sky above the battlefield. The Great War was not fought over the Iron Throne. It was fought in the frostbitten fields between Winterfell and the ruins of the Wall. Fire met ice. The living met the dead. Daenerys burned the skies. Jon faced the Night King alone at the heart of the storm. And as the two locked eyes, ice and fire, Jon felt the blood of the wolf rise in him, the call of the dragon scream through his veins. He didn't win by steel, he won by truth. The Night King died at Jon's hand, yes, but only because Jon allowed himself to die with him. The blood of the first men and the children of the forest ran through his veins. His sacrifice shattered the magic. The darkness broke, and as he fell, he whispered only one word, Lyanna. When the snow cleared, Jon's body was gone. Some say the gods took him. Others say he walks the woods still, guarding the realms of men. Daenerys survived. But she never returned to the capital. She left the Iron Throne to dust and flame, flying east with her dragons and sorrow. She had known love and purpose. That was enough. The Iron Throne stood empty. The Seven Kingdoms broke apart, ruled by their own lords once more. No more dragons, no more kings, just men and women trying to live without the weight of ancient fire hanging above their heads. The Game of Thrones ended, not with a victor, but with silence. And in the quiet, after the storm, the realm finally began to heal.